Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Beth McDonough. She is an Emmy award-winning journalist, 2 decades of journalism career that took her from small town Missouri to the nation's big television markets and covering some of America's top stories. We'll learn about about the heights of a demanding career to the depths of personal crisis and the courageous path she took to rebuild her life, about managing stress, about resilience, and finding the strength to rise again no matter what you are facing. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Hi, good morning.
Welcome to the show once again. Beth, and welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk about right now. To learn about your story, we'll learn from you about, from breaking news to breaking down and then rising again. We'll learn all that from you. But before that, let's learn a bit about your journey, your story, your background, so that people know who they are listening to.
Sure. And I appreciate that question, because I'm sure they're like, who is she and why should I care what she has to say? And believe me, I've asked myself that for all 160 pages of my book. So I really tried to put a lot of takeaway in the book for people. I grew up in LA. I was born and grew up in LA, and then we moved to Oklahoma. And a newscaster came and talked to one of our classes when I was a young lady. And I thought right then, I want to be a newscaster. I knew in grade school I wanted to be a newscaster. And to kind of climb the ranks in the news industry, you move a lot. And so I started in little bitty small markets as a cub reporter in places like Joplin, Missouri, Oklahoma City. And then I went to Tyler, Texas, Lubbock, Texas, Houston, Philadelphia. And I worked for a little bit in New York after 9/11. And then the last 15 years or so, I worked in Minnesota. And I've worked for all the networks at one point or another throughout my career. And I kind of had a niche in the industry. I covered major disasters, murder, death, destruction, mayhem, we called it. And I was on a go team. So anytime a major disaster happened, like a bridge falls into the water or a plane wreck or, mass casualties, I would be called to go to the scene, which I loved because I loved the excitement of it. I loved being where the action was. I loved being able to tell stories about survivors and interview people immediately after they've gone through something profound in their lives. And lo and behold, who would know early in my career that I would be sitting here doing this now. But my career ended temporarily back in 2008. I was a crime reporter and a fairly well-known crime reporter in Minnesota. And because I'd been around for a number of years, not because I'm all that special, I've just been around for a number of years. And I got 2 DUIs in 2 years. And I happened to be working for Fox News at the time. And after I got my first DUI, my boss warned me, Beth, I don't know if I can keep you because Fox has a 0 tolerance policy if you violate your contract or any of the moral clauses in said contract. But I was able to keep my job. I got in some trouble. I don't know if I got in enough trouble at the time. It's kind of a blessing in disguise. But my boss said, do you need help? He offered me a lifeline. Do you need help? We will get you help. We'll send you to treatment. We'll send you to, help you recover. And shame and stigma being what it is, it's a powerful thing and it keeps you stuck and it keeps you sick. And I never wanted to grow up and be an alcoholic. No one does. No one thinks that's going to be fun. So when this happened and I then got my second DUI, a year later, I knew it was over. I'd been warned and I tried to white knuckle it and do it myself right after I got the first DUI. But, alcohol doesn't negotiate. It's a taker, not a giver in the world of relationships. And it's an equal opportunity disease. And so when I got the second DUI, and I woke up in jail, and that's how the book starts. It's a hard start. You join me in the jail cell. with handcuffs on, wearing the orange jumpsuit. And on the big screen TV in the drunk tank, for lack of a better word, the news was on. Because what do you do when you're in jail? You're killing time. You're talking to each other, asking others, what they did to get there. And I woke up on this hard metal cot to women watching the news, talking about the story they were seeing on the TV. And the story they were seeing on the TV was my mugshot. And that's what I woke up to. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, my life is over as I know it. My life was over. And I certainly did get fired in a very public fashion. And I want to point out, they didn't do this to me. I did this to them. I put them in a really bad position. And they tried to help me before, and I just couldn't get over the stigma and the shame, because you're afraid if you admit you have a problem, you're going to lose everything. Here's the deal. If you don't admit you have a problem, you're going to lose everything anyway. And we find that out the hard way, those of us, who need recovery. And so when they were watching the TV, and I hear him chatter about who is that? I wonder where she is. Is she in our cell? Is she somewhere else here in the county jail? And I was like, oh, she's right here. She can hear it all, and I just knew right then it was done. So when I got out of jail, my boss said, come to the TV station. And it gets even more humiliating because if you get more than 2 DUIs in 10 years in the state of Minnesota, where I was living at the time, you lose your driver's license for a year and you lose your car. The state can seize it and then sell it at auction, which they did. And that just really stung because 2 weeks before my second DUI, I'd paid off my car. And I was like, oh, yay, one little step in adulthood. I can get rid of that bill. Well, I lost my car too. So, and then I would go on to lose everything. And my boss, when he brought me in, and this was really, really hard because I really respected and liked him. And we had a really good working relationship. And he tried to help me. And I just was stuck in my addiction and couldn't see my way through it and couldn't take the help. And so when I came in, he said, you've got to sign some paperwork. And he said, it's a shame, Beth, because you helped to put us on the map. You had a job for life. But as of today, you are no longer of use to us and you're fired, effective immediately. And he said, we got you a taxi. It's right outside the TV station. You can take it home or you can go to treatment. It's your choice. And I went to treatment.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Beth. How did the recovery part start? Because earlier on, when you still had time, you could not choose that path. Later on, how did you choose it? Why did you choose it? What made you choose it?
Really good question. Thank you for asking. I dropped an atomic bomb in my life. I was getting fired very publicly. All of the fellow TV stations, newspapers, radio stations, and even some national gossip magazines and TV stations, showed up at my home. So it was everywhere. My mugshot spread on the internet faster than I could, call loved ones and kind of break the news to them. And I think when you do something that profound and it's self-inflicted, it really causes you to take a step back and reevaluate, because I knew the risks. But when you're stuck in the addiction and you can't get out of the cravings and you can't get out of your own way, and the stigma, the U.S. Surgeon General has a report out that a recent report actually that talks about people in addiction, that only 10% of the people who need the help get it because shame and stigma. They don't want other people to know that they have a problem, that they're an alcoholic, that they're an addict, or whatever their challenge or issue is. And I was part of that group. I couldn't bring myself to reach out for the help that was being offered to me because I was still too stuck in the disease, but when I exploded my life and I would go on to, in a matter of months, lose my home, lost my income, I'd already lost my car, lost most of my friends, lost some family members, would lose my home. I was looking at bridges, honestly, to go live under. And I tried to get jobs at the mall, at the grocery store, but nobody would hire me because I was pretty damaged goods. So, when you face all of that, your entire world is upended. You ask yourself some hard questions. And I think I also couldn't take the help that was offered because as a reporter who covers real tragedies in life, I, over time started to absorb some of the pain of covering those tragedies. But you get to be very strong. You get a strong backbone because you have to in order to survive and, chase down news stories and break stories and cover the things and see the things, whether it's 9/11, the 35W bridge collapse, the George Floyd riots where I was shot in my hip. You get to be very strong to keep going in that field. And I just, I thought I could handle this. I'm going to get this under control. I can do this. I mean, I've overcome cancer. I've overcome many things in my life. And I was like, I can do this. I'm going to put my head to it. I can do it. Well, what you find out is, alcohol is stronger than you are. And that's why, it's a disease and it gets progressively worse over time, not better, not ever better. And so after I exploded my life and I had literally nothing in but days, to be out of my home, that's when you kind of go, okay, I'm either going to really get up and do this and look at it as, I have no life. I need to get my life back and I'm sick. And so when I went to treatment and I went to that Hazleton Betty Ford Recovery Center, and if you ever wonder if you're an alcoholic, well, just go to treatment because you're going to sit down with therapists day in and day out. You're going to do all of these tests. You're going to take psychological tests. You're going to listen to other people in recovery, whether it's men or women. And then you kind of go, you see the patterns. And I had them all. I had all of the patterns. And so it was in treatment that I really embraced that I had an alcohol use disorder. And it was up to me to accept the help and the support that was being offered to me, because people will help people who help themselves. If you don't do anything about it, nobody's going to step in and support you. But I also, failure wasn't an option again this time because I didn't have anything. I literally lost it all. And so when you're kind of with your back up against the wall that severely, you do what needs to be done. And so I did the work. I did the hard work, the therapy every day, the group therapy, the testing, talking with other alcoholics, going to speak at various treatment centers. And over time, and it's taken a long time, it's now been 16 years, but over time, I became really grounded in my sobriety. And I knew that I wanted to try and help other people, because when you see people who are still raw, like I was early on, you're just going to throw anything at the wall to try and get better. And you also need to know that you can get better. And so the reason I'm stepping out, it feels a little, if I'm honest, it feels like a shameless plug for me to promote my book. But I've tried to reframe it in my mind as I'm trying to build a bridge, to the people who need it, to see that you are never too far gone. Never, 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 never too far gone to turn it around, and you can turn it around. And so I just lay out all the ugly details in my book, and I don't gloss over anything. I just go there with it all. And I take people behind the scenes of my time in jail and the surreal experiences that I had, my process of court, what it looked like when I stepped out of my house every day, which was pretty bleak. And then, when it came down to, I had to leave my home. And when no one would hire me, then you kind of figure out, everybody else isn't the problem, I am. So I accepted it. I accepted the responsibility. And that's a big theme you'll see throughout the book, because I just feel like when I work with alcoholics now and they will tell me, I don't want anyone to know. I'm like, nope, that's not the approach we're taking. You want everyone to know. And I've seen this day in and day out for 16 years now, because it creates accountability. And that was one of the biggest positives that I did, is I owned my behavior. I made amends to all the many people that I hurt, because I caused a lot of collateral damage. And encouraging people to go, okay, I've done all of this. This is all my fault. I am to blame. And turn that around now. And I just wanted people to see all my many failures in this process, because also recovery is not a straight line. It's kind of like being on a highway. Sometimes it's straight, sometimes it curves, sometimes you hit a bump in the road, you might take the wrong exit, but your internal GPS will bring you back to where you're supposed to be. And I just want people to know that, as bad as their situations might be, that the book is kind of a companion and a tool, and you'll read all my yuck, and there's a lot of yuck in there, and I'm not at all proud of it, but I just wanted to lay it all out there so people know, well, man, she really screwed up, and look at me, I'm talking with you, I'm doing national book tours, I'm promoting all of this because I just believe in accountability so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll come to your book Standby separately also. I want to understand your story, much better. And here, looking at you, Beth, as a person, somebody who achieved something, lost that, went back to that same place. How did you, do that? What was when you had everything, and then you lost and you had nothing, as you said, and then you still were wanting to be, to be better back again? What was your bigger strength? How do people find some strength, something that you can, some sort of straw to cling to? How did you do that? How did you find that? Did you find anything, or you did not have even that? I want to, through that particular moment of yours, I want others also to look at life in whatever phase they are. If they want, they can learn, motivate themselves through that story.
Yes. And that's very important, because when you are raw in addiction and it's early, it's tough. I don't want to sugarcoat that. It's tough. It's much harder to get sober than stay sober, in my opinion, because early on you are consumed with the thoughts of drinking because you're trying so hard not to drink. So it's just what you think about all the time, and when I call the liquid, whether it's wine, beer, whatever people's drink of choice was, it's poison. And so I started to reframe that in my head of like, because I'm a big believer in wellness and health. And so I started to look at alcohol like, it wasn't my friend anymore. Didn't do me any favors. It is poison. And so that started to help my mind reset when I would see it, and I just couldn't understand when people would leave a drink on the table at a restaurant or something. I'm like, there's still some left, but going forward, when I would see that, I'm like, that is the enemy, that ruined your life. You with that ruined your life. And what I grasped at, I'm a pretty strong person, because you have to be in the news industry. And so I'm like, okay, Beth, you know what? Like, I've run the Chicago Marathon. I blew my back out in the 19th mile, but I still finished that race. You've done things. You've done hard things. And people have done hard things in their lives. So I want them to grab on to, one of those events and go, you know what? Okay, I made it through that. And the mass destruction developed me into a better person. So I owned all of the destruction. And, when I couldn't work and I didn't have any money and I was literally broke, I couldn't drive anywhere. Thank goodness there was a church at the end of my street that had meetings every day. So fortunately, I could go to a meeting to continue to work a program, learn a program, work it, embrace it, wholeheartedly embrace it, and just go there. If you're going to do something, go all in. Because when you're in addiction, you're going all in. Well, when you're in recovery, you should give that the same effort. Go all in. And there are no shortcuts, and there's no fast forward button. I wish there were, for all of us to just reduce our suffering a little bit. But so I went around in my neighborhood to people that I knew had dogs, and I have dogs, and I'm a big dog lover. And anyone in my world knows that I have rescue dogs. And I would knock on the doors. Hey, can I walk your dog for $20 while you're at work? I'll walk your dog and I'll pick up their poop. And that's what I did. That is how I slowly, because you've got to, whatever someone's witching hour was when they tend to drink the most. For me, that was after the news at night, because I always work night shift. And what's open at 11 or midnight? Not much. So what do? You go to bars. Well, you gotta figure out what to do in that witching hour and replace things with that. So for me, it would be, meal prep. I would do meal prep when I got home from the news. But going back to the dog situation, so my neighbors hired me to walk their dogs, and I did that for quite a while. And then they wanted me to daycare their dogs and board their dogs. Could I do that at my home? And I'm like, well, no, because I'm losing my home. I don't even know where I'm going to live. And one of my dog walking clients was gracious and generous enough to offer me this warehouse that she had at a reduced rate, so I could kind of move my business into that and try and really make a go of it and grow it, grow it, grow it. And to be honest with you, there was a bathroom and a shower at this warehouse. And I honestly thought, well, maybe I'm going to live there too. Maybe I'll be living with the dogs. We don't know yet. But also that same client was kind enough to offer me a place to live for a little bit until I could, get going, get some income and get back on my feet. And she was also very supportive of my recovery, which was super helpful. So I just humbled myself. You just humble yourself and you do what you got to do. And I humbled myself. I accepted the challenge because I got myself there, and I'm not a quitter. Professionally, that's great. Personally, if you're an alcoholic, not so good. And then, so you've reframed that in your head too. Okay, Beth, you're not a quitter. You finished the marathon. You've overcome these other things in life. You're not a quitter and you can't be a quitter now. You got to keep going because no one's going to fix this for you. You got to fix it yourself. So that's where I went with it. And then I built this doggy daycare and boarding and grooming business into what I'm just relieved to tell you was a really viable business. And at one point I had 11 employees. And so other corporations and businesses started to reach out to me and say, would you be willing to sell your business to us? Because they're looking at the bottom line. And, I made a meager income at this point. And I thought, gosh, no, because what on earth am I going to do with my life if I sell this? And, I couldn't get back into TV. I had tried 3 years prior and everybody to my face said, nope, no place for you. You're just too hot. You're too damaged. You're damaged goods. And so, but more offers kept coming in. And for anyone who has ever taken care of multiple dogs, and on any given day, we would take care of 40 to 60 dogs, which is a lot. And it's very consuming and labor intensive and exhausting. It's super fun, but it's a full-time physical job. There's manual labor involved. And so when companies kept coming and offering a little bit more and a little bit more, finally the time was right. I was exhausted because you are starting a business from the ground up, building a website, doing all the things, right? And getting your, working with the state on various things. So I was exhausted. The offer was right. And I'm like, all right, time for a change. The world more, because people kept offering to buy my business. And I thought, I've got to read the tea leaves here. There's supposed to be something next now. I've done my work here. So I sold the business. And the exact day that I was meeting with the new owner and handing over the keys to her, KSTP in St. Paul, Minnesota, called me out of the blue, an ABC affiliate, called me out of the blue and said, hey, we've got this investigative producer job. It's not on camera. You will not be a reporter like you've been most of your life. You'll be behind the scenes shaping and crafting stories for other people. Would you be interested? And I'm like, yes. I loved being a reporter. It was my life. It truly, I probably chose it over some other things in my life, but that's just where my passion was. So I couldn't wait. And mind you, this is the same TV station that 3 years prior said to my face, nope, we don't have a place for you. And I thought, well, as you reflect, and you have to reflect on your behavior, I'm like, well, what's the difference? Well, I'm sober. I got my act together. I put in the work. They saw it day in and day out. You could follow my website at Doggy Daycare. And so I'm like, okay, sobriety got me here. I have to honor this job offer and I have to honor my sobriety too. So I took the job and I'm just so grateful that I did because it is, I had a decent career before the 2 DUIs. And as good as that career was, I would say the second half of my news reporting career was exponentially better because I had a clear head. My priorities were straight. And it is so empowering for people to be able to know they can say no to alcohol. And that's something that really motivated me every day. You don't get to choose if you're an alcoholic or not. Maybe you're hardwired, it's in your family genes. And it certainly was in my family genes. Both my grandparents died from it. My biological father, who I didn't know, died from it. I have a sister that I lost to drug addiction. And which is just so, when you look at it, you're like, it's just everywhere. And my mom and stepdad did not drink. Didn't drink, it was just never in our house, never a thing. Because, after you do the work and you start to evaluate your family history, I'm like, okay, Beth, well, you're genetically predisposed to be an alcoholic, so you can't drink anymore. You can't do it. And you have to walk away from that lifestyle. And so I wanted to honor this third chance that I was being given by KSTP. And how do you honor it? Well, you just work your butt off for them. And in the process, you reclaim your dignity and your self-respect. And then over time, because time will show you how much better your life is with sobriety. And I'd love to tell people, that it's going to happen faster than it does, but it doesn't. It just takes time, because we've all heard a lot of people. We've done bad things that we would never do with a clear head. But when you're stuck in the throes of that, you are not yourself and your brain is altered. And so, it became to me the accountability. It was so empowering to slowly put one foot in front of the other and start to work my way back, earn people's respect again. And that feeds on itself. You want more of that. You realize you don't want more of the alcohol. That that wasn't a good friend to you. That didn't do you any favors. It ruined your life. Let's lean into the things that are improving your life. And, the dedication, and I just devoted myself 100%. I'm going there, no alcohol anymore. And, I've lived both sides of this, being a newscaster who's covered people who've had very public scandals and blown up their lives. And then, of course, it happened to me. And you're like, that leaves a mark. There's a scar there. And I want to heal from that scar.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Beth. You talk about love for journalism. You lost that newsroom and then got back to the anchor's desk. How
Yes.
was that feeling, getting back into, to smell the coffee at the newsroom, at your
Oh,
anchor's
my
desk?
goodness. Well, speaking of coffee. So I was a little bit nervous at first going back into a newsroom. Because, in newsrooms, people ask a lot of questions. That's our job. And they're going to ask a lot of questions of me, and I know that. So I was a little nervous going back in because, nobody wants to have others kind of look at you like, you're the ghoul. And when I walked into the newsroom, people were receptive to me, but guarded, because I still didn't quite know who I'd become, because I was off living a different world for 3 years, getting my act back together. They didn't quite know who I'd become, so they were guarded a little bit in the beginning. And then newsrooms being what they are, whether it's photographers, reporters, producers, the control room, the web folks, one of the very highly respected photographers in that newsroom came up to me and he goes, "Kit, you still drinking?" I mean, we just go there, don't we? And I said, absolutely not. God, no. No, it ruined my life. So I'm good. I try not to make the same mistakes repeatedly. Apparently I make them at least twice, though. That's a pattern in my life. But 2 was good. I'm done with, 2, I'm done with the DUIs. And I said, I am sober. And, we proceeded to sit down and he goes, "Can I ask you some questions?" And I said, sure. Because I knew that would make the rounds in the newsroom too, whatever my answers were. And I said, absolutely. I'm open. There's nothing that people can hold against me now. It's all been out there, whether it's in newspapers, on TV, or the radio. All my ugly stuff is out there. And I own it. So let's go. I want people, this is what accountability looks like, because accountability will help you profoundly in your recovery. And so he asked me a bunch of hard questions. Have you been drinking? Have you thought about, we're concerned that you might bring some bad PR on us. And that's pretty hard to hear. And I, we had a great heart-to-heart conversation. And I said, always feel free to ask me whatever you want. I'll give you my straight answers, And they asked me, why didn't you take that offer of help the first time? And I said, help is a 4-letter word. It's a dirty word to people sometimes in recovery. When you hear help, 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 we're like, no. Not because we don't think we need it, but who likes to ask for help in the world? Because you feel weak. And I said, that's why I couldn't bring myself to take the help, because I thought I could get on top of the problem. But you realize alcohol is much stronger than you are. So going back into the newsroom and then going out very publicly to crime scenes. And, I'd been around Minnesota for 15 years. So I knew a lot of people. They knew me, and they certainly knew my story, So when I'd go out in the public to whatever scenes, news events were taking place, at first people were kind of looking. They want to support, but they don't want to support if you're still actively using. So I just made it very clear. I don't use, it's not an option in my life. You just, I just can't be around it. One of the things that I did do too, before I lost my home, because there are a couple things that I think that could be helpful to people. I got rid of all the alcohol out of my home and all of the paraphernalia. And by that, I mean, the pretty wine glasses, the Pilsner glasses for your beer, your mule cups, all the cute stuff. I was giving it away to all my friends. I gave away all my alcohol. It was like Christmas for them. And that is really important to get that out of your realm. Because if you're having a craving, and when I was in treatment, you learn from medical experts that cravings last from 7 minutes to 20 minutes. That when you have a craving, if it's not in your home, chances are highly likely you're not going to get up and go get it. People just don't do that. And, so get it out of your home. That's one thing that will really, really help you. Also, for people going through cravings or who have trouble overcoming them, this is something so simple, but brush your teeth. Because nothing tastes good after you brush your teeth. Not coffee, not a beer, certainly not wine, or, have you ever eaten an orange after you brush your teeth? Oh my God. It's just blah. And so that's something else that I tell people. And I just continue to live honestly and cleanly every single day. And you have to give people time to warm up to that with you, because you caused a lot of damage and devastation. And they need time to see that you are living a clean life, that you're working the program, that you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, going to aftercare treatment, going to meetings, talking and working with others in recovery. And people need time to see that you are walking the walk, and slowly then, they can open back up to you, because they don't have to be afraid to be around you, or they don't have to, doubt what you say or do or your actions. It takes some time for that to happen. But every day that you put one foot in front of the other, you are leading yourself on this wonderful journey that time will show you just how fabulous a sober life can be.
Absolutely, Beth. Now let's come to your book, Stand By. So tell us a bit about the book. Who is this book for, and how does it feel to, earlier you were telling someone else's story. This time you were writing your own story. So this is a different sort of a story. I don't know whether one plans for such stories. Help us a bit about all these aspects of your book.
Yes. So standby is a TV term, and it's that space where you're in limbo as a reporter or anchor, right before you go live. You're in limbo waiting to see what's going to happen next. You have to be prepared for anything, right? That's the meaning of standby. And so that kind of explains the book. Well, you're in limbo, and, you got to start to lay the groundwork for whatever's next. So that's where that term comes from. And I started writing the book 16 years ago when I was on house arrest. I'd been in the county jail for 2 weekends. I'd gone to the workhouse, which is a labor camp, for a weekend. I was fined. I was sued. All sorts of any repercussion you can think of that no one wants in their life happened, and rightly so. That's the consequence of my behavior. And so I wanted to start writing the book while I was on house arrest because I had a lot of time on my hands. And, it's a lot of time to be up in your head and trying to work through some things. And so I've always been a writer as a, newscaster and a journalist. I've always been a writer. And so I just started to sit down and write, mainly to kind of have something to do, but also to vent a little bit and get some of the yucky stuff inside of me out. They say if ever you want to have a hard conversation with someone, write a letter first, and then put the letter away. So that was kind of my version of writing. Let's get this out. Let me just start to explain. And also because it felt like a personal diary too. I wanted to have it to be able to go back and look at it, to remind me every day that's never what I want to do again. I don't want to ever be that person again. And when you lay out all your ugly, like being in jail and someone offering me cocaine from her private girl parts, kind of like, well, that's a new low. Just some things that I went through. So I use it as a reminder as well of just, here's how bad it can get if you go down that path again. This is where, and it may not end there. It may end in death. You killing someone driving on the road, or the alcohol killing me. And, to that point, and because I'm a reporter, so I have to throw a factoid or two in there. The CDC reports that there's a 255% increase, 255%. That's a lot. Increase in alcohol-related deaths in the last 20 years. I mean, that's a boatload. And it is preventable, but people have to take some action. So as I continued getting through the book, and I'm like, oh, this is therapeutic, okay, woo, I'm releasing all of this out into the universe. Whoo, I just want to keep it going. And then I kept writing, and I'm like, I have learned so much in this process about, if you question if you're an alcoholic, how to get the answer. And I've learned so much about recovery and behaviors and experiences and insights along my journey that you can't go through all of that for naught. There's got to be takeaway. And there's got to be takeaway, not just for me, but for the person behind me, because I know what that feels like. And I know what it feels like when you're drowning and you just don't know if you're going to be able to keep your head above water. I know that feeling, and it's desperation, and it's awful. So as I continued writing the book then, and this was hard for me, I would stop and start over the years, because it's really hard to face all of your demons every day on a computer in front of you, in big typed letters. And you're like, man, I did that. Well, guess what? I did that. I'm responsible. But it's good to see that. It's good to see yourself in that mirror, because you realize, well, I don't want to be that person anymore. She sounds like a jerk. And so I just kept writing, and I wanted to put takeaway in there for people to see. And I put all the failures in there and all the messy parts, because I did not live a perfect life. So I put all of that in there, because whether people are in recovery, regret, they want to reinvent their lives, I think they can see themselves in my struggle, in my surrender. You have to surrender to it, or you're not going to get anywhere. And then my strength. So I wanted to write really good takeaway for people in there. And to that end, when I was in treatment, you meet with medical experts and doctors and seasoned addiction therapists, and you learn a lot. And I'm a reporter. I like to learn a lot and absorb the information. And something that really shocked me, that I'd like to share with other people, when I would drink, my friends would say, Beth, like you've had one glass of maybe wine, and you go from 0 to 100. I'm not a maybe kind of person. If we're going. We're going to go hard. And, but I would have a glass, and they'd be like, you go from 0 to 100, then your personality starts to change, and And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And then if you're on antidepressants, well, that magnifies the alcohol even more. So, if you're on an antidepressant, you have one drink, well, it's like 3 drinks. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. Okay. And then they tell you that women in particular, we have some unique risks. We are 30% more susceptible to the inebriating effects of alcohol for a few reasons versus men. Because we women, we have more fat on our bodies, darn it, and we have less of an enzyme that's needed to break down the alcohol. Well, men, conversely, have more water in their bodies. Alcohol dissolves in water. So, and you'll see people out, men and women, who've had the same number of drinks, but men can tolerate it much more. Their behavior doesn't become crazy. With we women, it can. And it's so I wanted people to know that, because for women that might be watching this in particular, just know you're at a disadvantage out of the gate because of that alone, because there's just not enough water in our bodies to dissolve all that alcohol. And since the pandemic, when we're all stuck in our homes and couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything, well, the rate of alcoholism among women increased exponentially too, 25%, and more visits to the hospitals because of alcohol-related complications. So you kind of learn all the what's and whys, and the medical this and the medical that, and the mental with all the therapy you go through. And so that's why I started doing the book. And then, as a reporter, we're objective. I go out, I tell everyone else's story. I get in their business, I learn their intimate details, and people have been wonderful to share that with me over the years and trusted me with that, to tell their story accurately and correctly. And, going in to tell those stories, it was just very, very meaningful. And so I just wanted to share and pay it forward. And the judge in my case, when I went to be sentenced, the prosecutor at the time wanted to send me to state prison for 90 days because of my high profile position. She was using it to send a message to the masses. And I don't blame her. If I were in her role, I'd do the same darn thing. You're going to hit that ball out of the park pretty quickly. That people are going to be like, that happened to her, could have happened to me. And so when I went to sentencing, and the judge said he would like to see me privately in his chambers. And at the time I was like, oh God, a bad day's about to get a whole bunch worse, but he's the judge. So I did go into his chambers. And when I walked into there, the judge is standing there with his arms out like this to hug me. And he said, this is really unpleasant. I understand that. And he said, ever since your name appeared on my docket after your last arrest, he said, I need you to be coming through my courtroom. And he said, I am not going to send you to state prison. He said, you've got enough consequences, because I was sued, and, all the penalties in Minnesota are doubled. And he said, so I'm not going to send you to state prison. You're not getting off scot-free. You're going to have punishment. And he did. He sent me to a labor camp and some other things, and house arrest and drug testing, random drug testing for a year. A deputy could come by my home at any time. And if I failed, that was it. I would go serve my sentence in state prison. He made that very clear. But he said, I want you to know, before your hearing today, he said, I went to my meeting and I got my 20-year chip. And I know you can do this too. So he said, go back out there. There'll be some repercussions. But no, I got through it. And this guy, he's a judge. He's brilliant. He's gone to law school. He's been on the bench for 30 years. He's seen it all. I've seen a lot. He's probably seen and heard more. And he's heard all the excuses and all the things. But he said, the one thing that stuck out to me about you is you have owned this from day one. You've owned it. So I'm going to give you a chance. You don't get a break. You're still going to have consequences, but I will give you a chance. Somebody gave him a chance once, and here he is 20 years sober. And he said, but I ask one thing: when you get out there and when you're ready, you pay it forward. So that's part of what I'm doing, is paying it forward. The judge got clean. I got clean. You can too.
Absolutely. So who is this standby for? Who is this story for?
Oh boy, this story is for anyone who needs to hear it. And by that, I mean, people struggle with all sorts of things, and as you get further along in life, we all have issues, whatever they are. And so the book is for anyone who's in recovery, who wants to reinvent their lives. It's also, I've had to accept this, it's also true crime, and the true crime is mine. I was the criminal, I'm a crime reporter one day and the criminal the next. And so it has the true crime element in it, and it's a memoir. And I just wanted to show people that by stopping drinking, you improve your life substantially. And here's all the messy that you can go through. And I do believe people, especially if they're in addiction or recovery, will be able to relate to it. And I want to emphasize that asking for help, and I know it feels like a dirty word, so we can use the word support if you want, asking for support, it doesn't weaken you. It actually amplifies all the resources that will be made available to you. And it's a sign of strength. And also people, when you've blown up your life, you don't think there is a future. And I want to show people and emphasize you can blow up your life in spectacular fashion. And you can also turn that around. If you did that, you can do this. But again, it's work. It took work to blow up your life. You got to put in some work to improve your life. And that's what this book is for. And men, women, I speak to both sides of it. And I want to inspire people to ask themselves some hard questions. And what I hope, shame and stigma kept me kind of backed in this corner for a long time, like it does a lot of people. And I want people to realize that you can overcome the shame and the stigma. It takes a little bit of time, but you can overcome that and become an even better person than you were before. And I say, don't take my word for it. Read the book, look and see all of this, and take from it what you need, what works for you, because different things work for different people, right? And I also wanted it to come out at this particular time. So I'm grateful the timing worked out, because we're about to wrap up Sober October here in the US. Then we're heading into November, we're no drinking in November. And then January, you've got dry January. And I tell people, you know what? There's no good time to start anything, but why not start now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why not start now? One last question to you to understand is for all the people who are going through these issues, who are, tackling it, overcome it. How do you look at yourself, the whole life and the whole journey through all these things? Do you look at it as some sort of a redemption, something that you lost, or as a warrior, as a victorious person, as a winner? How do you look at it overall, sitting where you are at?
I'm incredibly relieved at this point, and relieved that I'm not that person anymore. So I'm very relieved by that. And you had also asked, about writing the book. Well, as a reporter, I'm supposed to be objective, and that's the goal. But when you write something like this, you can't tell it from the outside. You got to get in there and be vulnerable. And that was hard for me. It was very, very hard for me. And it took a long time. Because you just have to lay it all out there. And then turning it around now, when I look at myself, I'm like, I don't even know who that was anymore. I mean, she did wild, crazy things and behaviors that I would never do if I were sober. And I did a lot of things I don't even remember because I was a blackout drinker. But the people around me remember, the people it hurt remember. And, you reach a point where you don't want to hurt people anymore. You're hurting yourself for sure, but you're hurting other people. And I'm just not wired to sit there and hurt people. It's just not, I like to help people and uplift. And, when you grab onto that and embrace it going forward, you can help other people. And I didn't really understand that. I don't know if I bought into that early on, but when I talk with people along the way now, and I tell them you can be broken and you can be brave, and there might be a misstep or two along the way, but it's not a character fault. Alcoholism is a disease. You didn't choose it, but you can choose recovery. And every day you can get up and course correct. You can make a decision to course correct. And that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Beth. There is much to learn from you about all this. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more about your story and the story that you have written in Stand By. What's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, you bet. So there are a few ways to get the book. It's on Amazon internationally, also Barnes and Noble. And just this week, it came out an ebook edition on Kindle. So also on Amazon for folks. And the next 5 or 6 months, it'll be out on Audibles, but it takes a little time to do the recording and the production for that. So you can find it on any of those sites. I also have an author website, www.bethmcdmedia.com, and you can get the book there as well. And this book is one of 2, so a sequel will be coming out next year. Stand By is the fall. When I detail all the ugly parts. The second book that comes out next year is called Still Standing, which reveals the comeback and the rise and everything involved. And I also go into a great deal more detail in the second book about all the news stories I've covered, whether it's 9/11 or the George Floyd riots, or Jacob Wetterling's killer finally confessing, or Jamie Kloss's escape from her abduction. So I go into more detail on that. And I'm also starting a podcast called What Could Possibly Go Wrong? And that will be out soon, which talks about recovery, but also life events. And we're kind of using the book Stand By as the launching pad for that, and as a place that we could really come from to open the eyes of other people and just really inspire them that when you stop hiding behind your lies and the shame and you come out, your life just improves dramatically. And I want to show people that they can create an even better life that they don't have to escape from. They don't have to numb themselves from. And as a result of that, the second half of my career was substantially better. And my relationships, the ones that I was able to mend, I couldn't mend them all. Like my father, my stepfather, being one of them, he died before we could really reconnect. But he thought alcoholism was a character fault. And that he's a different generation. That was pretty hard to deal with. But you make amends where you can. And I try to live by example. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but I really believe if people say, she used to be a drunk and look at her now, she's off, blah, 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 blah. I want that. So you show them the life they want. Because when somebody wants something bad enough, they're going to go out there and do it. Whether it's buying a new dress, getting sober, if somebody really wants something, you're not going to get in their way. They're going to go get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for your time. And I appreciate the opportunity to spread the message.